He went after her full throttle, you know? I mean, he would not leave her alone. It was scary sometimes.
I mean, he found out she was home because he had called the house phone and they had talked on the phone. And he knew that her parents weren't going to be home and that, she was probably in more of a, vulnerable state maybe.
When they broke up, he had nothing. I mean, there was nothing but Tumi. And if he couldn't have her, nobody else was going to have her.
Police say they're searching for McCallum's boyfriend, 23-year-old Michael Cordero. They say his last known address is 90 Amsterdam Avenue. They won't call him a suspect, but they say they'd like to speak to him.
When you're young and in love, everything is a lot more dramatic. The relationship can feel like the only one you're ever going to have, and most young people give it their all. But what happens when the relationship that you're in is not the right one for you? When you're young and in love, it can be hard to see the red flags coming. It can be quite easy to explain those red flags away as mistakes and accidents, because when you're young and in love, it can be hard to imagine that the red flags you're trying to explain away might be the very ones that will lead to your death. What events led to Tumi's life being taken away from her? How was the person who unalived her caught? Let's find out in this story of twisted love, a desire to help, and a fatal obsession. This is the story of Boitumelo McCallum, the girl who was strangled to death by her obsessive boyfriend.
His intentions are quite clear. I've seen pictures that he's drawn, very violent pictures, with a picture of him holding up a head that's been decapitated, and the head is what resembles Tumi.
On August 1st, 2009, at around 9 p.m., a couple subletting a bedroom in a two-bedroom apartment reported smelling a foul odor coming from the second bedroom. When the building superintendent attempted to investigate the source of the odor, he found the door locked from the inside. The smell, plus the lack of access to the room, left him with a nagging feeling that something had gone horribly wrong, so he alerted the authorities to the situation. By the time the officers arrived at the 8th floor apartment, it was already 10 p.m. The tenants in the other bedroom told them they hadn't seen their flatmate since a few days before, when she threw a wild party. The odor, as well as the suspicious circumstances of the situation, left the officers suspecting foul play, so they entered the bedroom through an unlocked balcony window. When officers stepped inside the room was in disarray. There were clothes strewn about and beer bottles all over the place, but there was something else present, something that overwhelmed the officers, something they described as the stench of death. It wasn't long till they traced the source of the odor to some bedding sheets in a space between the bed and the wall. Upon closer investigation, the officers caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a body hidden within the soiled linens. That body was identified as 20-year-old Boitumelo Arabella McCallum. Boitumelo Arabella McCallum, fondly called Tumi by those who loved her, was born on July 25, 1987 in Soweto, a township of the city of Johannesburg. She was born into a powerful family, a family of educators.
Tumi was just the most remarkable human being from the day she was born. Just remarkable.
Her mother, Teboho Moja, was a clinical professor of higher education at NYU, and her father, Robert McCallum, was an adjunct professor at NYU. Tumi and her family were very close. She had a younger brother named Lebogang McCallum. Although Tumi was older than him, they went everywhere together, or more like he followed her everywhere she went. Tumi and her brother had an unbreakable bond, since it was just the two of them growing up. They only had each other to play with, and as they grew up, that friendship remained. Tumi and her brother were born in South Africa during the apartheid regime. They were born to parents of different races, so their existence at the time was a crime, as the races weren't allowed to mix. And to make it worse, Tumi's mother was very active in the fight against apartheid, and her work made her and her family a target in South Africa. She was constantly being pursued by the apartheid government at the time for her anti-apartheid activism. But after the apartheid regime came to an end, Tumi's mother decided she was done with politics. She had seen her country free, which was what she fought for, but she didn't want a role in ruling the new South Africa. She wanted a fresh start. The McCullums set their sights on New York, and in no time, she got an offer to teach at NYU, and she moved the family to New York in 1999. They got an apartment just a few blocks from Washington Square Park, surrounded by the energy of the big city, the city that never sleeps. While it was a bit of an adjustment for the rest of her family, for Tumi, it was different. She was home. She didn't have any trouble fitting in. She was inspired by the energy in New York, and she quickly started to thrive and shine. She was a top student at Greenwich Village Middle School, and her academic performance only improved as she got older. As a teen, Tumi attended the selective college prep school Beacon in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan. Tumi did extremely well in New York. She made friends super easily. She was described as a very fun-loving and genuinely happy girl who was very creative. She was involved in dance and writing. New York nurtured those parts of her, but before long, Tumi's well-adjusted, happy life would come crashing down around her when her parents separated. Tumi, whose idea of a perfect loving marriage was the one her parents had, did not handle the news of their separation and her dad moving on so quickly.
My dad found new love, that's correct. That it didn't bother me, but for her it was, she didn't look at it that way. She took it a lot harder than I did.
Well, it was at this point, when Tumi was very vulnerable, that she met a man named Michael Cordero.
I think she was more of desperate to be in a relationship. And I think what was framing a lot of that was her own personal disappointment, given what was happening in the family.
It was a very tough time for Tumi. Her parents were getting a divorce. They were fighting a lot at the time. Her dad had moved on with someone new. And what's worse, her brother, who was her confidant and the only person who would understand what she was going through at that time, was away at boarding school.
I'm sure she did feel a little alone. I mean, from having a sibling around all the time, all of a sudden the sibling's now gone to boarding school in South Africa, then her parents get divorced.
But then Michael Cordero came into her life, and he gave her a whole lot of attention, and a little bit more.
Maybe she looked for a substitute, and that was the only substitute available at that time, showing the love, being obsessed with you.
Michael and Tumi came from very different worlds. She was from a rich, educated African family, and he was from New York, born and raised on the streets, mostly poor and uneducated. In a different world, they might not have a lot of things in common, but somehow they connected.
They met at a party. They ended up sitting at the same couch at one point because they were both tired from dancing, I guess. I guess she was laying on him. He asked for her number. She gave it to him, except for the last digit.
Tumi's mom believed that was a sign that she didn't want to be with him, but he wore her down. People who knew Michael when he was a child described him as a very active kid. He was the fastest at tag and the class clown. He knew how to make people laugh, and he was always lively and fun. When he was in elementary school, he snuck his ferret into school, but when the teachers found out, they made him take it out and pass it around so that the whole class could pet the ferret. But as he got older, he lost a lot of his fun, funny nature, and things began to go downhill for him. The older he got, the worse it got, and soon enough he began to build a small rap sheet for petty crimes.
Like a year later, Tumi and I were walking down the street. We were at Beacon, and we were going to the store, and we ran into this kid who is Mike, and he asked for the last digit, and she gave it.
And that's how the relationship between Tumi and Mike began. The relationship moved very quickly and became intense super fast.
He would call her very often, and she'd tell me how they'd have conversations for like 6 hours and stuff, and he would just listen. And I guess I think that's why she fell for him.
Before long, Tumi was introducing Michael to her family. While Tumi was fully in love with Mike, her family, on the other hand, were not pleased.
She came rushing, meeting me when I got off the plane, and she was with Mike, who I was meeting and hearing about for the first time. I took one look at this guy and I knew I didn't like him.
Her mom knew the first time she laid eyes on him, he wasn't the one for her.
He seemed very nice. I mean, in the first impression, I mean, he wasn't the kind of person I expected Tumi to sort of go out with.
But it wasn't just that he wasn't the type of man they'd envisioned for their daughter. There was something very off about him from the beginning.
I think a mother has got a sixth sense, and maybe that's what I'm going around not getting to. I knew there was something not right. It was an intuition, and I had hoped it wasn't going to last.
But to her family's surprise, the relationship did not fizzle out. Instead, it grew strong. At that time, Tumi was rounding up her high school and making plans to attend college, and Mike was working to get his GED. It seemed like Tumi might be a good influence on Mike, like she might inspire him to get his life in order and make plans for his future. A friend of his at the time even observed that Mike tried to clean up his life when he met Tumi.
And he seemed like a really good boyfriend, you know, like he didn't seem like an abusive one, you know, he seemed like a really good one.
But people close to Tumi had a very different idea of what was going on in that relationship.
One of the things that I noticed and I was uncomfortable with was the fact that there were too many phone calls from him.
I'm the one that paid the telephone bill. I saw that he phoned her every 20 minutes, every 40 minutes. I think emotionally it was a lot for Tumi to bear.
Once Mike zeroed in on Tumi, he never let her go. At first, it was very endearing to Tumi, who felt like her life was falling apart at the time. He seemed a solid rock in her otherwise chaotic life, so she didn't notice how intense he was at first.
Because she always emphasized that part as being unfortunate. Lost parents, lost that, and so on. And she wouldn't see the other side.
But it wasn't long before she started to catch on. Mike wanted to speak with her, or be with her every second of every day. And what was cute to Tumi initially started to come off as obsessive.
He went after her. He went after her full throttle, you know? I mean, he would not leave her alone. It was scary sometimes.
At this point, Tumi was getting ready to graduate high school and had applied to colleges around New York. But for some reason, she chose to apply to one college in Fairway, California.
I want to believe that she genuinely fell in love with him, thinking that that's the right guy. But at the same time, she was realizing certain things that maybe he's not quite right.
At the time, Tumi's friends and family suspected Mike might have had something to do with her wanting to move so far away.
She was very torn, and I think at the same time that she was attracted to him, she was torn. I mean, I became aware that he was an obsessive personality, that he wasn't leaving her alone.
Tumi applied to and got into Mills College in Oakland, California. She accepted the application and moved to California.
I thought it was really interesting that she went all the way to California for college. I think she definitely wanted to get away from him.
And they were right, because when she moved to California, Tumi became a whole new person, or at least the person that she was before she met Mike came back.
In that time, I really noticed a real shift in Tumi. You know, that she was looking at California even as making a new home there.
But what Tumi's family didn't know at the time was that Mike moved to California a short while after Tumi moved, and Tumi paid for his ticket herself out of the allowance her parents gave her.
Life was going on, but she wasn't talking about what was happening, that she was having Mike's company. And I didn't know that Mike was in California.
It was at this point that Tumi's family began to suspect that Mike might be dating Tumi for a different reason than she was dating him.
I don't think he was looking for a family. He was looking for a ticket out of his own situation.
It became even more obvious when Michael went away to rehab for a while, and he didn't stop contacting Tumi. He would write letters to her constantly, letters asking her if she truly loved him the way he loved her, and Tumi responded, saying she did.
I think in his own mind, it was like his life is set if he stays in that, but he blew it in another way because he just didn't fit in it.
But that wasn't all. Though Tumi's family were right to be worried that Mike only saw Tumi as his meal ticket, there was another reason for them to be worried. Tumi was no longer in love with Mike. By the time he joined her in California, she had had some time away from him, and that time helped her figure out that she didn't want the toxic relationship they had.
He definitely felt very threatened, I mean, obviously, and knew that things were not the same. She wasn't in love with him
in the same way anymore.
Michael didn't like that. It was at this point that Tumi's family and friends started to notice something else was going on. They recalled several heated phone calls between Tumi and Michael, if Mike so much as heard a male voice on the other end of the line. But there was more. There were times when Tumi would come home with bruises on her body. She'd come home with a new bruise each time, and when they asked her, she would brush it off. But the bruises kept coming, and Tumi kept explaining them away, or brushing off her friends' worries about her. But as the pain she was suffering at the hands of Mike became too frequent, Tumi's friends grew more concerned about her and begged her to leave him, but for some reason she couldn't, and it wasn't long before they witnessed it with their own eyes.
They had a little tiff, and he threw Tumi onto the ground. They were outside the residence, sort of grabbed her arm and threw her on the ground.
This time around, many people were around to see it and even had to step in at some point to stop it before it got out of hand.
Students in the residence, they heard her screams and shouts. She was trying to escape from him, and they came to her rescue.
They were very worried because it seemed like he had one mission on his mind: to hurt Tumi very badly, or maybe even unalive her.
They had to throw him out. One chap actually had a crowbar. He said he almost physically had to use the crowbar to get him away from Tumi. I mean, he wanted to kill her.
Before he left California, though, Mike made sure Tumi wouldn't be able to leave, that he would be able to find her whenever he wanted.
He took Tumi's passport, Tumi's cell phone, Tumi's ticket for coming home because she was getting ready to come home, and so on, and just left.
Tumi had no choice but to involve her family at this point. She called her father and finally opened up about what was going on in her relationship, what Mike was doing to her. Her father had to chase Mike down to the airport and confronted him about leaving Tumi alone.
I told him that the relationship was over. Tumi didn't want to see him again, and that he needed to move on with his life.
That was it. The relationship was over.
Once the relationship was over, Tumi's parents encouraged her to stay away from him, emphasizing that if he could lay his hands on her once, he would do it again. Her father even went as far as changing her phone number so he wouldn't be able to reach her.
He phoned me, I think, 2 days afterwards wanting to speak to Tumi, and I said, well, she doesn't have a phone, she's not contactable, she doesn't want to see you. I said, move on with your life.
Once Michael was out of the picture, everyone was happier, especially Tumi, who her friends noticed seemed finally free.
She'd come up to visit me that earlier on that summer. We had such a great time, and this is when she was like totally done with Mike, and she was so free and so happy.
But unfortunately, that would not be the last time they heard from Mike.
What we didn't know was that it wasn't over with Mike.
Without any form of contacting her, Tumi seemed to sever the ties between them. She was much happier. She spent the summer volunteering at an organization where she helped imprisoned women access help and care in prison. Tumi felt right at home with her volunteer work and told her parents she felt like she had found what she wanted to do for the rest of her life: help people. Tumi was also going through some emotional healing at that time. She seemed to have come around to her dad's new relationship and spent the summer hanging out with friends, spending time with family, and writing research papers on the experience of women of color in U.S. prisons. On August 1st, 2009, Tumi decided to throw her father an engagement party. This is where things went horribly wrong.
I mean, he found out she was home. So he had called the house phone, and they had talked on the phone. And he knew that her parents weren't going to be home, and that, she was probably in more of a, vulnerable state.
The party went on into the early hours of the morning and people started to leave. Tumi's father was one of the last people to leave the party, spending a little bit more time with his little girl. Little did he know that night would be the last time he would see his little girl alive.
20-year-old Boitumelo McCallum was strangled and then smothered with a towel over her face.
When officers got to Tumi's mother's apartment where she was staying and made their way into her room, they found Tumi's body wrapped and positioned in a small space between the bed and the wall. wall, a space so small that officers didn't see her at first. In her hand, they found 2 dog tags with her name and Michael's name inscribed in it. The dog tags were later identified as a birthday gift she gave Michael that he wore everywhere. But that wasn't all. There were also a few things missing from her laptop. A few valuable things like her laptop and cell phone, but then some sentimental things as well were stolen. Things that would only make sense to someone who loved her, like her art writings. The couple living in the other bedroom had a lot to say to the officers. They had told officers that Mike had been visiting Tumi the day she was last seen, and what's worse, they saw something bizarre just before he left the apartment. They saw him wash his hands in the bathroom just after he locked Tumi's door from the inside and made his way back to the apartment. Michael became a prime suspect, and authorities immediately wanted to speak with him, but he was nowhere to be found.
Police say they're searching for McCallum's boyfriend, 23-year-old Michael Cordero. They say his last known address is 90 Amsterdam Avenue. They won't call him a suspect, but they say they'd like to speak to him.
But before long, he found his way to them. Just as the authorities were looking for him, a 911 dispatch received a rather bizarre call at around 8:40 p.m. on August 7, 2009. Dispatch received a call about a man bleeding and being chased by people on the street of Manhattan. That call came in as officers closed in on arresting Michael. When they got to the scene, they saw Michael running into a nearby supermarket and wasted no time chasing him. It turns out the people that were chasing him before had been his family members. He had tried to take his life after realizing the officers were closing in on him.
What happened was he saw the cops and he ran to his building. You know, I guess because of the heat of the moment, he didn't know what to do, so he cut his wrists. You know, I guess because he didn't want to get caught. I guess he just wanted to let go of his life right then and there. And you know, he was running with bloody wrists, and that's probably how he got caught.
But that wasn't all. Michael would eventually confess everything he did to Tumi to hospital workers and in the presence of law enforcement officers.
Police say 23-year-old Michael Cordero confessed to killing his 20-year-old girlfriend after an argument Friday and leaving her body here inside her mother's apartment. They say he was distraught as he outlined what happened detail by detail at Roosevelt Hospital, where he was taken after attempting suicide.
He told the hospital staff and officers that he was angry with Tumi the night he unalived her. He had found out she invited all of her friends to her father's engagement party and didn't invite him, though they were not together at the time. He decided to go see Tumi and confront her about not inviting him to the party. Officers found out that at that point, contrary to what Tumi's family believed, Tumi was still communicating with Michael. He had reached out to her through Facebook, and after ignoring him several times, she finally gave in, and that's how he sunk his hooks into her until the bitter end. Michael told officers he went to the apartment to confront Tumi, but they ended up watching a movie together. According to him, he was quiet the whole night, and Tumi noticed and asked him about what was wrong, but he didn't answer, so she kept asking. It was at this point that Michael said he snapped. With his confession in hand, the authorities wasted no time charging Michael Cordero with the murder of Boitumelo McCallum.
Well, at first I didn't even believe it was him. You know, I thought they was talking about somebody else because I could not see that happening.
But people who knew Michael couldn't believe it. They could not envision Michael doing something like that to someone he claimed to love deeply.
I know it was an accident, you know, because he wouldn't intentionally do that. Like, you know, like, he wouldn't intentionally kill her. Like, that I can tell you for sure.
Tumi's family, however, had no trouble believing it. They had witnessed the obsession. They had been there to help her cut him off. They had seen the bruises. So Michelle's act about wanting to unalive himself because he couldn't live without her wasn't an act they were buying, especially because he waited until officers were about to catch up with him before trying to unalive himself.
I felt that was part of the staging. He knows how to kill. He knows how to kill himself. If he was remorseful, he wouldn't have left this building. He would have jumped off this building.
Not remorseful for what he did. He doesn't care about what he's doing to the family or what effect it has on me or my mother or my father, you know. But he is remorseful for the effect it's having on him now, that he doesn't have anybody reaching out to him anymore.
Although Tumi's family had no trouble believing that Michael could hurt Tumi, at the time, they had no idea that all of the toxicity between Tumi and Michael would escalate and take Tumi with it. And for that, they blamed themselves.
I didn't think that he'd be somebody that would kill somebody. I was on the lookout for that. And I thought that we'd nabbed it in the bag.
They blamed themselves for not knowing she was going to see Mike that night, especially her dad, who had just left the apartment before the chilling murder of his daughter took place.
I thought that that was over, and I was continuing to monitor it. And she kept on saying no, she wasn't seeing, it was over. Because if I would have not allowed, I would have interfered.
I guess I also look at New York as the fault of all this, if my family had never come to New York, this never would have happened,
Tumi's family suffered unimaginable pain when Tumi was taken from them. Her parents moved her from South Africa to New York to have a chance at a better life.
I wanted to come here, give them an opportunity, let us live somewhere else, let us do something different, let me get out of all the political work that I was involved with in South Africa.
But instead, they were taking her back to South Africa in a box.
She came to the US in the plane, sitting in the passenger seat. She went back as cargo in the bottom.
In 2010, the trial of Michael Cordero began, and although he had confessed to the crime, he pleaded not guilty.
A man accused of strangling his former girlfriend pleads not guilty to second-degree murder. This, even though court papers filed by prosecutors say Michael Cordero told a nurse in the presence of police that he tried to commit suicide because he killed his girlfriend.
His defense was that it was an accident. He hadn't meant to hurt Tumi, and he had just snapped. But Tumi's family had a different idea of what happened.
Walking down the passage to the apartment, I get angry emotions, what was going through his head when he was thinking, I'm going to go into this apartment and murder her.
And when officers raided his apartment and found drawings of Tumi where he was doing violent things to her, her family knew they had been right.
His intentions were quite clear. I've seen pictures that he's drawn, very violent pictures, with a picture of him holding up a head that's been decapitated, and the head is what resembles Tumi.
Tumi desperately wanted to save Mike from himself, wanted to be the one to pull him out of his terrible life and offer him a different one. But no matter how hard she tried, Mike would not let her.
She thought she could save him. She really, really did. And I'm sure at times she did. I'm sure she really did at times. But in the end, he could not handle her not wanting to be with him any longer.
I realized that when they broke up that he had nothing. There was nothing but Tumi. And if he couldn't have her, nobody else was going to have her.
Hey, thanks for watching. Our deepest sympathies go to the family of Boitumelo McCallum. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you know of other similar cases? Let me know in a comment. And before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you next time, and stay safe.